I have to quote Hemingway, whose quotes I like better sometimes than his fiction. He said, when you start out, it's fun for you and hell for the reader. By the end, it's hell for you and fun for the reader. And you learn so much with each one. And I'm sure you knew this by the end of your book. And you're just much more demanding. And things that you would have leaned back and said, oh, I love that sentence. When you were starting out, you now say, that just won't fly. So it's wonderful. And I never want to give it up. But it does become kind of more painful as you go on.
Does it get easier?
No, because I think you have more options. You write, I'm frequently writing things in different ways, and then I have to come back and figure out, how do I want to play. I don't think it gets easier. I think I do more drafts. It may get easier for some people.
I can't imagine that it would.
No.
There's nothing easy about it.
No.
It's a hard job. It's a hard job, and 90% of it you're not happy with, and you just throw it out and start over again.
Yes.
But it's so exciting that your third book is up for this award. I think it's just good because you must reach that point where you just think, how much more do I want to devote my life to writing? And then this happens, and you're like, it has to be. I want to devote the rest of my life to writing.
Well, it always has been for me. I have a fantasy on the last day of my life. I type however many pages, perhaps 3. And slump forward gracefully over the computer. That's the way I envisioned it. It's very scary to think of not writing, for me, but that's what I've done most of my life in one capacity or another. And it's very painful sometimes, but when it's going well, and you know this, there's very little like it.
It's so exciting.
Yes, it really is.
You're in a different world.
Yes.
And when you surface again, you're just shocked that the world is going on like it had been.
Yes,
because you've been somewhere else.
It is amazing. When I struggled with Ruby's voice, as I say, it took me a long time, and finally she took over and I couldn't stop. And I write in a library, and I'd be writing all day, and I'd leave the library, and my language was still Ruby's language, and I'd talk to people, and I'd be saying ain't, and things like this. It was a very interesting, it takes you a while to swim up from this, from where you've been.
Yeah, it does put you someplace else, and it's very exhausting at the same time when you've had that type of experience. I'm just drained when it's over. You're ecstatic, but at the same time, you just are exhausted. So it would be really interesting for somebody to observe what it looks like to an outsider, because I feel so totally focused.
Yes.
That, I'm sure that there's this whole appearance of just being somewhere else. School teachers would, I'm sure, recommend us for daydreaming, and I do a lot of daydreaming. Do you? Do you dream? I mean, do you think, spend a lot of time just thinking about your characters?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and just thinking of different avenues, if I do this.
Yes. I don't have the freedom, if I do this, they'll go a different way, but I certainly have the freedom to figure out how do I want to show this scene, from whose point of view, and do I want to show this scene at all, or do I want to move on to something else? How do you make this, in the case of Scottsboro, this 50-year dragging on event, interesting to people in dramatic terms? I mean, there were many trials, and I chose certain parts of one trial, and in fact I used the transcripts, and even then you've got to trim and figure out what to use, because the transcript can put you to sleep. It's a dicey business, mixing or fictionalizing history, real historical events. I am very careful. I will never change anything that really happened. I will occasionally finesse the time frame, and then in the afterward I'll say that something happened at a different time, and I do that only for dramatic effect. But I feel a real obligation to stay close to it. What my interest really is going deeper beneath the surface of these characters. I can't invent when I write these novels, but what I can do is explore the characters who lived these events. And with Ruby Bates, who was a girl who cried rape, and then she said, no, I wasn't raped, and then she said, yes, I was raped. She changed her mind, she changed her testimony 5 times in her lifetime. And this was a woman for whom at first I felt no affinity, of course, and who comes from such a different world from the one I grew up in, and I found it fascinating trying to get into her mind, but also, for me, this was the most exciting part of the book, trying to get into her voice. When I started writing the book, I didn't dare try to write in Ruby's first person. I just knew that it was too far from what I knew. But as I kept writing draft after draft, which is the way I write, Ruby was just crying out to be heard. And little by little, by doing a lot of studying of Southern dialect, I finally started to write in Ruby's voice. And for me, that was a very thrilling part of it.
Ida B. Wells Barnett is a historical figure, a person probably most people don't know. And so that gave me a little bit more freedom to work with her. But we don't really ever hear her voice. I wrote more of other people responding to Ida B. Wells, so I think that was a little easier for me, their reactions to her and how she impacted their life. But I felt even describing Ida B. Wells Barnett, I was very careful to study quite a few photographs of how she typically looked and how she influenced people and how she related to the common person. So that was where there's a lot of documentation about your people.
Yes.
And so you have to be very, very careful. And you were really going into seeing the world as they saw it. And I never did that with Ida B. Wells Barnett, for example. It's very different.
But you did, because when you just said now that she never speaks, having read the book, I felt as if she was a real character there. And she just says one thing to Rachel, but it stays with you, and it's very vivid.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Well, and even those few words that she said, I just labored over those.
Yes.
I thought that has to be what she would have said.
Yes.
And you have no idea. You have no idea. But I figured nobody else does either. So that is very nice to have that.
It was very interesting when I started work on this novel. If you're a novelist and you know this, people say, "What are you working on now?" Every time I said Scottsboro, they'd say, "Terrific." This is in the States. And then there'd be a beat, and they'd say, "Refresh my memory. What was that about again?" And it was astonishing because it's iconic in the 20th century. The word Scottsboro, people know race, and they know injustice, and nobody knows anything more about it. Historians do, obviously, and a handful of older people. But younger people have never heard of it. And even some of us of a certain age who studied it in school don't really know what happened. And it convulsed the nation. And it also reverberated around the world. I mean, there were benefits here in London. There were demonstrations in Paris and Berlin and, of course, Moscow. So it was an amazing case.
It's such an easy way to learn history because your journalist's voice is so lively and she's so much fun that you don't realize that you're getting a history lesson along the way because she's just such a lively character.